Good evening and welcome to the Mystery Hour. Now, my guest tonight is Colin, a professional psychic investigator who looks at all rational explanations. Over the coming weeks, we aim to look into all matters related to the unexplained phenomena, ranging from stigmata through to cryptozoology and more. So stay tuned. Now, Colin, what are we going to talk about tonight?
Oh, good evening, Chris. I
Okay.
thought we'd talk about the life of Mary Julie Jahani, who's one of the most convincing stigmatists that hardly anyone knows about.
Wow, that sounds really interesting.
Thank you. Yes. Shall I begin?
Please do. Yeah, I'm fascinated because she's quite recent, isn't she? She was around when you talk about history. She died not that long ago.
1941.
So there's pictures of her and that.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. Yeah, there's quite a lot of recorded, well detailed information about Mary Julie.
But hardly anybody's ever heard of her. But she's one of the most convincing there's ever been.
Yes, some people know of her, but it's only in certain circles. So it's mostly some of the most well-known ones that are pushed rather than Mary Julie.
Wonder why she's been pushed into the sidelines, because I don't know hardly anything about her, but by what you've said before we went on air, she is probably one of the, if not the most convincing of the whole lot. And it seems funny she's been pushed into the twilight zone, so to speak.
Well, absolutely, Chris. Yeah, that's true.
I wonder what they're trying to hide. It makes you wonder, doesn't it?
It certainly does. If I could give you a brief rundown of her life to begin with.
Please do, yeah.
So, Marie Julie is a mystic and stigmatist. This lady was born on the 12th of February 1850 in a small village in Brittany called Blaine. Now, some do say that she was born in another small hamlet called Coyault, which is spelled Coyault, but from the sources that I've studied, it's Blaine, and many do confirm that. She was the eldest of 5 children, brought up by her parents. She was favoured with graces from God when she had her first Holy Communion, to which she became even more devoted. In her early 20s, she joined the Franciscan Third Order. This was to help sanctify herself in the Word. In 1873, the Stigmata began, and when this began, Mary Julie was 23 years of age. And from being 23 until her passing in 1941, aged 91, she had, throughout those years, for a further 60 years, the wounds of Jesus Christ. These wounds were more visible than any other stigmatist. So that's it. She went through more than any of the others, even though I have seen pictures of some, and it does look absolutely terrible what they're going through, of course. In the church's history of investigating stigmata, so she like I say, she's one of the people, one of the stigmatists who suffered terribly, as I will explain.
Was it painful to them? I suppose it must have been.
Yes, there was times when the pain would end, but that was only when in what they call ecstasy. Because at that point of being in ecstasy, there's no feeling. There's no feeling as such as towards what's happening. So it's quite very difficult stuff, Chris, to actually get our heads around. We wouldn't want to see anybody in such agony as what she was going through. It's quite awful in parts, really. So These wounds were more visible than any other stigmatist. In the Church's history of investigating stigmata, she bore the wounds which are called the 5 wounds of the sacred hands, feet, and side. Also, she suffered wounds inflicted by the crown of thorns and cross on top of this. Shoulder wounds, wounds of scourging, wounds of the ropes as Jesus Christ was bound, and other mystical wounds. Marie Julie suffered as a victim soul. She resided in a small cottage in a hamlet of La Fraude, which is near Blaine. Because of what she went through, subjected to, she fulfilled God's desire to make reparation for the sins of France and the rest of the world. She had many visions. Some of these visions were of Jesus and Mary. Some were of prophetic lights. Mary Julie was very humble, a humble messenger. The warnings given to her were vindicated by complete and total honesty and simplicity. Mary Julie was obedient to a bishop and the spiritual directors. She was always loyal and humble by the fulfillment of all that she prophesied. All of this taking place during her long life. With incredible accuracy, she foretold World Wars I and II, the election of Pope Pius X, various persecutions of the Church, the chastisements, and the fate of the apostate France. And there is much more to come to unfold, as Mary Julie warned of the last times. She had a gift of recognizing Eucharistic bread, knowing that it was not normal bread, objects that had been blessed. She was shown relics, and she would say where they had come from. She understood in several languages hymns and liturgical prayers. In a 5-year period starting December the 28th, 1875, she survived only on Holy Communion. A doctor by the name of Imbert Gorbier recorded during this whole period that there was no liquid or solid excretions. She was insensitive to pain or intense light during her ecstasies. During some of these ecstasies, Marie Julie would levitate. At this moment, she was ecstatically light. Marie Julie was the wonder of many scientists who examined her continually. Unbelievers, skeptics, were scornful. She was admired by her lifelong friend, Monseigneur Ferrier, Bishop of Nantes, and of course the devoted people who made the diffusion of her messages to an ungrateful and unheeding world their life's work. Marie Julie passed away March the 4th, 1941. She had indeed suffered, blind, deaf, dumb and crippled. She had lived on subsistence on incredibly miraculously on the Blessed Sacrament for the last many years of her life. Subsisted, sorry, that my writing, I can't understand it. Sorry.
You've certainly done your research into it, but what I find interesting is that there was scientific people that went there and verified and made scientific documents about what they saw. Yes, it turned out to be true.
Yes, it wasn't just a normal, usual doctor. Over the years, other people also went. And this is why I have read on some other websites that are done by skeptics where they said maybe it was psychosomatic, maybe she caused all these things herself, which in itself is a phenomenon. But it's because of all what she went through, and also the revelations to come, which will be for the next show, hopefully. That is what really made me think that there's something in what was happening. Because then in 1873, the stigmatization of Marie Julie begins. The doctor Imbert Gourier, a professional at the Faculty of Medicine of Clermont-Ferrand, writes, "From the first years of Stigmata, I was called by Monseigneur Ferrier, Bishop of Nantes, to examine medically this young Breton peasant. She was then 23 years old. The examination over, I declared to the bishop that he possessed a young woman with a genuine stigmata. Now, in studying this, Chris, I wondered why he would say that he possessed, because as the bishop, maybe what he meant was that he was looking after her. He was trying to see what was going on, and that's what people say at the time. So I'm not saying that he was physically possessing her, but was keeping an eye on her, so to speak. That was
I
what was
can
going on.
understand, but
Yeah.
these people, I mean, what gets me, excuse me for coming here, but
Yeah.
when a journalist come along and report on something, they are there to sell newspapers.
Yeah.
And normally, I mean, there are some really good journalists, yes, but there are, for every one good journalist, there are umpteen others that are bad, and they've got to get a story, whatever happens, and they make it all frilly and tart it up. But these people that were reporting weren't journalists, they were scientists and clergymen and people of the church who would not embellish the truth.
Absolutely. Yes. So he as I say, he declared to the bishop that you more or less you have a young woman with genuine stigmata, that there was no fraud at La Fraude. So that's the way he put it. Monsignor Fernier arrived promptly at the conviction that the manifestations presented by his diocesan were of divine origin. On the 6th of June 1875, the holy bishop wrote to the doctor, "The reports that I receive daily on Mary Julie show me more and more the action of God on this soul. He grants her graces of an obvious supernatural order. At the same time, she grows in virtue and noble sentiments. The natural and human disappear in her, and she often speaks to people she sees or who are referred to her, giving instructions which are not in keeping with her normal state. Therefore, be confident, dear doctor, that the time will come when Mary Julie herself will be the proof. She is sincere. What she manifests is supernatural. I see nothing but good, edifying in conformity with the principles of spirituality." If I could just say, Chris, that this is a man of his time, because if we saw what was happening,
Yeah,
we'd be horrified, But
that's
because of
right.
what was going on, and I'll get to it
But
further
if I
on.
could come in there, I mean, she didn't do anything for money. She lived in poverty all her life.
Yes,
Whereas you get people like Sister Teresa of Calcutta, the more I hear about her, the more I think, ugh, ugh, it's
yeah,
money, 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 money.
yes,
Whereas
absolutely right.
this woman, what is impressive about her, she stayed in poverty, and people offered her money, and she refused. No, she lived in poverty.
She'd only accept a little bit,
Yeah.
and that's the family. That was mainly the family just saying, "Look, you haven't got much," so
Mm.
and that's where that came from, which was, well, very,
That's that's fair enough. Yes.
yes, absolutely, yeah, yeah, yeah. Therefore, it is God who favours her. You may be sure it will turn out well. On the 22nd of February 1873, Mary Julie was seriously ill. Our Lady appeared to her, telling her that she would have much to suffer. The following 15th of March, there was another apparition of the Mother of God. She asked Mary Julie if she would accept the same sufferings as that of her son had endured for men. The reply was in the affirmative, upon which Our Lady announced that she would later have 5 wounds, so Mary Julie had accepted to go through this. So it was all done by consent, Chris. The stigmata began on the following 21st of March. The doctor interrogated Mary Julie on the way she had received the stigmata. I mean, so this is the way that it was put.
Mm.
That this wasn't just messing about here. This was real questioning to see what was going on.
So I mean, let's face it, these people, again, they're not, this wasn't a journalist. This was a person that had his reputation at stake. So, it's up to him to report accurately. And
Yes, absolutely. Yeah,
this is what makes her very, I would say, quite unique amongst most of the cases. She lived in poverty. She was dedicated to what she did, and her prophecies are absolutely mind-blowing.
Absolutely, Chris. Yeah, yeah. There's absolutely one way of putting it. Yeah. So at this point, the doctor is really going to town on on Mary Julie and the subject as a whole. He wanted to know how she was receiving this stigmata. And she replied, "When I received the stigmata, our Lord appeared to me with radiant wounds. It was as if the sun surrounded them. A luminous ray came out of each wound and struck my hands and feet and side. At the end of each ray there was a drop of red blood. The ray that left the side of our Lord was twice as wide as the others and was shaped like a lance. The pain I felt was very great, but it lasted barely 1 second." So, as we've said earlier, Chris, she suffered terribly, and in writing these notes, I put that down, that Mary Julie suffered terribly. In 1875, she announced for over a month and several times that she would soon have a new stigmata, a cross and a flower with the inscription O Crux and Ave, AVE. So that's O Crux AVE would be impressed on her chest. More than a week beforehand, she specified the date. It was to be on the 7th of December. The day before Mary Julie's chest was examined to establish that the promised stigmata did not exist. So they were, again, thoroughly checking everything. The following day before the ecstasy, she offered to be examined again. It was deemed useless. She had the right to be believed. Soon she went into ecstasy, and while the marvellous impression was being made, witnesses and the family were able to verify incomparable scents that emanated from her body throughout her clothes. When the ecstasy was over, one could see the cross, the flower, and the inscription on her chest. And I was trying to work out what that smell would have been, Chris, and I would have thought it was burning skin.
Yeah, my word.
So that's
So
what
they're in this room,
yeah.
and suddenly this is forming on her body.
Yeah. So
Right.
while she's in going through the ecstasy, the witnesses there, not just the family members but other people that were there, they could smell what I should imagine would probably be burning. Yeah, but I'm not sure because we don't know. That's the only explanation that we have. And on now to Mary Julie now has the most amount of stigmata, the most ever seen. The 5 wounds, the crown, the stigmata of the shoulder, of the scourging, and the ropes that tied Jesus Christ, the stigmata of the ring finger, and the epigraphic and figurative stigmata. If I could just explain about the ring finger, Chris. In one of the ecstasies, she was told, I think, by Mary that did she want to join with her son in some kind of a marriage, and she said yes. And she explained it, what was going to happen, and they saw on the wedding finger the burning, the swelling on a finger, and then the form of a ring.
Heavens.
So again, a lot of pain, which she at the time she said she didn't feel, but then afterwards it came on. But that was that one. Yeah, so that's the stigmata of the ring finger. Yes, since the beginning of June 1880, Mary Julie had to endure extraordinary sufferings during ecstasies on Mondays, Tuesdays, and Thursdays. That was every week. At each ecstasy there was a new scene. Her manifold sufferings were announced during the preceding ecstasies. What is even more remarkable is that they were described as if it were commented on during the ecstasy by Mary Julie herself, so she was guiding them through it verbally. During the Way of the Cross, the preceding Friday, our Lord had said to Mary Julie, he repeated his words during the ecstasy, which were then taken down by a secretary on Monday to expiate the culpable offences that I will receive and that I have already received this month. I will oppress you in a different way. All your limbs will shrink. I will reduce you to being so small that you will have no freedom in any limb. Your head will be fixed to your bones, and you will be like the worm that I destroy. In this pain, your sufferings will be very violent. All your joints will suffer. With this pain, you'll have a burning fever. Your tongue will be swollen, very large. There will be a visible swelling at all the joints of your bones, and this will show how strong the pain is. All the prophetic program was to take place before my eyes, said the doctor. This took place on Monday, the 27th of September, 1880. That was September 1880. A comparison with another stigmata, Martha Robin of Chateauneuf-de-Galères, sorry about my French. She also had her limbs completely shrunk to incredible proportions as a result of a general retraction. Dr. Imbert said that after a few days of having assisted at these extraordinary sufferings, I heard Mary Julie announce in front of me in profound ecstasy that she would soon have a new and long illness, as if that all of that wasn't enough. In the preceding 6 months, she had often said that God had asked her for the complete sacrifice of her eyes, ears, speech, and movement. She accepted everything. On Sunday the 19th of December, Mary Julie knew by revelation that her sacrifice would begin 2 days later. Now the following Tuesday, she lost her speech and no longer heard the voices of her family. She knew the following day that she would become blind in 3 days' time. The third day, she was blind. The conditions of her dumbness were extraordinary. Her tongue was immovable, as hard as a stone, pushed backward with the point bent under and completely blocking the throat. Her mouth was closed, the lips motionless, and no one longer saw Marie Julie praying, so no one saw her praying after that. I mean, this is horrific stuff, Chris.
It is, but it seems like, excuse me, sort of coming in here, that
Yeah,
there is a sort of entity that we don't understand that was doing this, that we cannot see. I mean, it's like dogs can see and smell things that we can't see and smell. Animals can, because we, out of all the mammals, we're the most puniest. We can't hear very well. We can't see very well.
oh,
And this is sort of going into the territory of Jerry Mowinski in America, who looks into a lot of this. This is a very uncanny one, isn't it? It really is. I mean, to think that there were professional doctors and that around watching what was going on.
yes, absolutely. Yeah. It's very difficult stuff. Yeah, very much. Yeah.
So she could see into the future as well. This is the most amazing thing, which we'll do on another program.
Yes, well, that's absolutely right. All this terrible suffering that she went through was for us, really, because she said on many an occasion, please, forgive them. So she's a lovely lady, really.
She looks it. I mean, there are photographs of her, but it's a very, very odd thing that it does seem like some sort of entities behind her that were kind of guiding her in a very weird, very, very weird. But whatever these entities were, they could see into the future.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, all the pain and suffering that she went through, the bones, the joints, everything, the stigmata, and then the tongue being pressed back down the throat. I mean, the doctor witnessed this. It must have been very, very difficult for them, Chris. I know that it would have been for you and I.
Yeah, must
Awful.
have been.
Even though what she was doing for was so it was for a good cause. But I
The
wouldn't.
belief and that. I mean, it's. I mean, what is amazing to me, I mean, it's we're covering the stigmata again. When you look at history, was relatively recent. You know, I mean, when I say recent, you know, within the last 100 years or so.
Oh, you're
But,
absolutely right. Yeah.
yeah, but if you know, when you go back to things like Notre Dame and that, and the Mother Shipton and that, they were so long ago that what they said has been written, especially with Notre Dame. It's been people have actually translated it, and it's all very ambiguous. You know, great army will come across the river. Well, that could be interpreted as anything really. But whereas with this woman, she was within the last 100 years, and what she said was not ambiguous.
No,
You know, it couldn't be sort of. That is the most amazing thing. I mean, she is obviously genuine.
I'm leaning towards that much, very much.
Yeah.
Um, Especially with how humble she was. I mean, of course, there are people that say that maybe she did it, she was got at and did it for the greater good and all this. The greater good as in being manipulated. I
Mm.
don't think so, and I think that many of the people around her, they would have, they would have come clean about these things. And there was many people there and witnesses, and they say that she was genuine. If I could just finish off, Chris, there's not too much
Certainly,
to
yeah.
go. Um,
She's fascinating.
yes, thank you. On the 10th of February 1881, the following words of ecstasy were recorded. Our Lord was saying to the victim, who of course is Mary Julie, and most certainly that is the word for it. Uh, do you want to suffer again? Yes, my Jesus, she replied. Well, from next Monday, you will no longer be able to stay on your stake. I believe that means stand, doesn't it?
I would have thought so, yeah.
Yes. All your limbs will become disjointed, but without changing position. All the limbs on your left side, from the soles of your feet to the top of your head, will no longer move. I am willing, my Jesus. You will stay in your armchair. There, new crucifixions of sufferings will come to keep you company one by one. The same day, a long martyrdom began that was to last several years. Her body was freezing. Out of pity, her family wanted to put her to bed one evening. It was impossible. She was nailed to her chair of pain by an invisible force that was heavier than a block of marble. She made them understand that they would be able to put her to bed only at 1 in the morning. At that moment, she became lighter than a feather. The victim, Mary Julie, was deaf, but it soon became apparent that she could hear the words of the priest when he spoke in Latin. She was blind, but during ecstasies she could see apparitions from heaven, which was made manifest by the beauty and vivacity of her ecstatic expression. Her speech had been taken away, but on the day that our Lord had told her that the light would be taken from her, he had said to her, during ecstasies, I will give you back your speech. And at that time, her tongue was loosened, which again was witnessed, Chris. Um, She moved her lips, that were previously immovable, and began to talk. As soon as she had finished, her tongue contracted once more and took up its first position. Mary Julie was paralysed, but every Friday at 9 in the morning, this paralysis disappeared, providentially, so that she could change her linen and do the Stations of the Cross at 1 o'clock, as was her custom. When the ecstasy ended, her left side became paralysed again for 8 days. all of this was witnessed. The illness of Mary Julie lasted almost 4 years, coming to an end gradually. First the hemiplegia disappeared, then in succession the dumbness, the deafness and the blindness. Dr. Imbert Gorbier, professor at the Faculty of Medicine at Clermont-Ferrand, a top man in science of medicine, does not hesitate to conclude, it seems that Lafredet has appeared for the very purpose of combating the saptriere, that's a French word, Chris, on the very grounds of hysteria. The extraordinary sufferings of Mary Julie were accompanied by a dominant symptom, contracture, which plays an important role in neurosis. All the circumstances of this symptom prove that it was not of hysterical nature. Besides, who has ever seen at the sapultiere? I'll spell that, Chris. It's Salpeteriere, or anywhere else, as a contracture that eases regularly every Friday for several hours to allow the subject to talk and walk in ecstasy. He was shocked, Chris, to be quite honest with you. Yes, yeah. The observations of the Breton Virgin dispels all the observations of known hysteria. It is enough to be a doctor to understand. And I thought next week, Chris, we would discuss about Mary Julie's battle with the devil, which is the next instalment.
Well, that's it, and I think that what you've said about it is really warming up, because also I think we're going to cover over the weeks her prophecies,
Yes,
which are quite amazing. This is I would say, as far as I know, it sounds like a very unique case.
Yes, there has been other people that have had similar prophecies.
Yeah.
But Mary Julie's gone very, very in depth on things. Whoever was telling her these things, we presume it was God. Then these prophecies are most definitely coming true.
Because there was another one, Nicolaus von Rensburg in South Africa, who was around 1921. But I don't think he was a stigmata. I don't know much about him, but he was very accurate with his prophecies as well.
Yes, if I could guide people to a really interesting channel, such as yours, it is New Earth Channel. That's New Earth, as in NEWEARTH, and there's quite a number of people on there that have made prophecies about things, and of course, the lady that runs that channel, she discusses Mary Julie quite a lot. It was a friend that guided me to this particular subject. I'd never really covered stigmata, to be honest with you. Other things such as the paranormal and ghosts and ufology, but never stigmata. So it's quite a new thing for me, but it's also very, very interesting, and the suffering to which she went into is horrific and remarkable at the same time, Chris.
What a person. And also, I mean, what we're also going to cover over the weeks is that you have witnessed quite a lot, because you were a psychic investigator, and you set up all the technical equipment and everything, which cannot, which tells you truthfully what's going on, which, and but as I say, this Mary Julie, she sounds an incredible woman. I mean, it's really quite. I've never heard anything like it. It's I've never heard of her until you mentioned it, ever.
Well, the one thing about all this, Chris, and people may say psychosomatic and all these other things, for forcing your tongue back down your throat. I mean, how horrific is that? As if everything else wasn't. The breaking of the bones, the swelling, the joints, the not being able to move, freezing cold. You and I were carers for many years, Chris, and this is why it really affects me, this in this way, that the terrible pain and suffering.
Mm.
That even if you and I went along and witnessed, I don't know how much you could, take without saying this lady needs help. But I mean, she consented to it, and
But
what came from it was all the
you're right.
prophecies.
What I'm interested in is the entities that were behind this, and looking at it from a sort of like a wider thing. There's a lot of evidence that there are entities behind what is actually happening at the moment. When you look at governments, there seems to be evil entities there, evil around. As the Chinese call it, the yin and the yang, the positive and the negative. There's a lot of, when you look at negatives in that.
Well, I do think that I absolutely agree with you. There's more than just psychopathy at work here. Of course, it does involve a lot of that. But to carry on what this plan that they're carrying out for maybe possibly centuries is a very difficult thing for many people to get their heads around. But that's what the conclusion that I've come to. And it's more than just because, as normal people, we wouldn't want to do these things. We wouldn't want to do that.
You're right.
There's much more going on.
Oh, there is, and I think that a lot of these people do seem guided by something that's absolutely pure evil, because you've only got to look around. I mean, I used to work in the city. I hasten to add, not in banking. I was a contract bloke, and nothing to do with banking. But when you look around the city of London, the amount of kind of satanic symbols there are, it's quite disturbing. And I walked around there and didn't even notice it at the time. It's only afterwards, when I researched into this, it really shook me at how satanic the city of London really is. And they reckon that Wall Street is. I've never been there, but they reckon the Wall Street is as bad as that as well. So it's a really fascinating subject. So what are we going to cover next week, Colin?
Well, hopefully we'll cover about Mary Julie. It becomes under attack from the devil. That's quite an interesting thing to cover. And also I thought, Chris, if it'd be all right to cover the prophecies.
The prophecies. That'll be fascinating. Well, thanks for joining me this evening, Colin. I mean, this is fascinating stuff, and thank you for educating not only myself but the listeners to an incredible woman that I, for one, had never ever heard of before. You hear of all these other people, but you never hear of her, and she is quite an amazing woman. And so please join us, everybody. Thank you very much, Colin. I mean, I don't know if you've got anything more to add.
Well, just that it was remarkable that this lady got to 91, Chris, because we've all had our fair share of pain, but it's one, to accept it by consent, and two, to get through this is absolutely incredible. It really, really is, and I'd just like to say thank you for this, Chris. It's been very good. Thank you.
Well, thank you for coming on.